The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the marble floor of our kitchen as I stared at my laptop screen in complete disbelief. There it was, in black and white, a professional review from one of my longest-standing clients, mentioning how understanding they were being about my current personal struggles and how they hoped I would get back to my usual reliable self soon. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I read those words over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I had no personal struggles. My work had never been more consistent, more professional, or more on point than it was right now. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, please like and subscribe. I read every comment, so tell me where you're from. My name is Margaret Kennedy. I'm 54 years old, and after 23 years building my reputation as a freelance marketing consultant, someone was systematically destroying everything I'd worked for. The worst part? I had no idea how long this had been going on, or how many of my clients had been fed this poisonous narrative about my supposed unreliability. I swept up the ceramic shards with trembling hands, my mind racing through every recent interaction, every project delivery, every client meeting. Had I missed something? Made some catastrophic error that I'd somehow blocked from my memory? No, absolutely not. My project management system was flawless, my deliverables always exceeded expectations, and my communication with clients was thorough and professional. So where was this coming from? The sound of glass clinking into the trash can echoed through our spacious kitchen like tiny bells of doom. I'd spent the better part of my adult life building my client base from nothing, nurturing relationships, delivering exceptional work that spoke for itself. My reputation wasn't just my livelihood, it was my identity, my pride, my legacy in an industry that could be brutal to women my age. As I grabbed my phone to start making calls, a sick realization began creeping through my thoughts like ice water. This wasn't random. This wasn't some misunderstanding or miscommunication. Someone was doing this deliberately, methodically, and they had access to my client list. Someone who knew enough about my business to sound credible when they reached out to plant these seeds of doubt. The obvious suspect made my stomach turn. Derek Hoffman, my co-worker at Morrison & Associates, where I'd been taking on part-time consulting projects for the past 8 months. Derek, who was 15 years younger than me and constantly made comments about bringing fresh energy to our client relationships. Derek, who had access to all the same client databases I did, who sat in on the same strategy meetings, who knew exactly which accounts I was managing. Derek, who had been nothing but friendly and supportive to my face, while apparently stabbing me in the back behind closed doors. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I'd actually grown to like Derek during our months working together. He was charming, quick-witted, and I'd even found myself mentoring him on some of the more complex client relationships. We'd shared coffee breaks, collaborated on presentations, and I genuinely thought we had a good working relationship built on mutual respect. How naive could I have been? My hands shook as I scrolled through my recent emails, looking for clues I might have missed. There, a message from Patricia Chen at Nordstrom Creative, thanking me for my honesty about the challenges you're facing, and assuring me they wanted to support me through this difficult time. What challenges? What difficult time? I'd delivered their entire rebranding campaign 2 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. Another email from Global Marketing Solutions expressing their patience with the recent delays and hoping my family situation would resolve soon. There had been no delays. My family situation was perfectly stable. My husband Robert was thriving in his retirement. Our daughter Emily had just gotten a promotion at her law firm, and we'd never been happier or more secure. The scope of the damage was becoming clearer with each message I uncovered. Derek hadn't just made a few casual comments. He'd been conducting a comprehensive campaign to undermine my credibility. He'd positioned himself as the concerned colleague, probably expressing worry about my performance while simultaneously offering himself as a reliable alternative when I inevitably couldn't handle the workload. It was diabolically clever. And it was working. I sank into one of our kitchen bar stools, my mind spinning through the implications. How many clients had he contacted? How many projects had I lost without even knowing I was being considered unreliable? How many potential referrals had dried up because word was spreading through professional networks that Margaret Kennedy was going through something and couldn't be counted on? The financial impact alone could be devastating. I'd built my consulting practice into a six-figure business that supplemented Robert's retirement income beautifully and gave us the freedom to travel, to help Emily with her student loans, to live the life we'd planned and saved for. If Derek succeeded in destroying my reputation, we could lose everything I'd worked decades to build. But it was more than money. It was the violation of trust, the calculated nature of his betrayal, the way he'd smiled at me just yesterday while asking about my weekend plans. How long had he been planning this? Had every friendly conversation been fake? Every collaborative moment a performance while he gathered intelligence to use against me? I needed proof. I needed to understand exactly what he'd been telling people and how extensive the damage was. Most importantly, I needed to figure out how to stop him before he destroyed what remained of my professional relationships. The front door opened, and I heard Robert's familiar footsteps crossing the hardwood floors of our entryway. My husband of 28 years had always been my anchor in storms like this, and right now, I desperately needed his steady perspective and unwavering support. One small detail blew the whole thing open. "Margaret, you home?" Robert's voice carried that familiar warmth that had sustained me through nearly 3 decades of marriage. "In the kitchen," I called back, quickly closing my laptop. I wasn't ready to explain everything yet, not until I could organize my thoughts and present the situation clearly, rather than as the emotional mess swirling in my head. Robert appeared in the doorway, still wearing his golf shirt and carrying the subtle scent of fresh air and sunscreen. His silver hair was slightly windswept, and he had that relaxed expression he'd worn so often since retirement. It was about to disappear. "How was your round?" I asked, trying to inject normalcy into my voice. "Shot an 82, which isn't terrible for someone who's supposedly over the hill." He moved toward the refrigerator, then stopped, studying my face with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to read my moods over decades of shared life. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, just work stuff." I fidgeted with my coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. "Margaret." He pulled out the bar stool next to mine and sat down, giving me his full attention. "You've got that look you had when Emily was 16 and came home past curfew with some story about her car breaking down." "This isn't about Emily." "No, but it's about someone lying to you. So, what happened?" I took a deep breath and opened my laptop again, turning the screen toward him. "Derek has been telling our clients that I'm going through personal problems and that I'm unreliable." Robert's eyebrows drew together as he scanned the emails. His expression shifted from confusion to concern, to something harder. "This client thinks you're having family issues?" "Multiple clients, apparently. Look at this one." I clicked to the Global Marketing Solutions email. "They're being patient with recent delays that don't exist. They think our family is in crisis." "Our family?" Robert's voice had taken on an edge I rarely heard. "What exactly has this Derek been telling people about us?" "I don't know yet. But it's been going on long enough that clients are treating it like established fact. I scrolled through more messages, each one adding weight to the growing pit in my stomach. Look at this one from Hartwell Industries. They're asking if I need to reduce my project load temporarily. Robert was quiet for a long moment, reading over my shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. How long have you been working with Derek? 18 months. He came highly recommended, said he wanted to learn from someone with my experience before eventually starting his own practice. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I've been mentoring him, Robert, introducing him to my clients, teaching him my processes, sharing contacts I've built over 15 years. And he's been undermining you the entire time? I don't think it was the entire time, but long enough to do real damage. I pulled up my client database, the numbers that represented years of careful relationship building. I've lost 3 major clients in the past 2 months. They all gave vague reasons about changing directions or budget constraints. Now I'm wondering if Derek was working behind the scenes. Robert stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. His shoulders were tense, and I could see him working through the implications the same way I had been. How much money are we talking about? He asked finally. If this continues, potentially everything. My entire client base could be compromised. The words felt heavy leaving my mouth. We could lose the business entirely. He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected. Not just anger on my behalf, but a deeper concern that made my stomach clench. Margaret, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier, but I didn't think it was important. What do you mean? Robert returned to his seat, but he didn't meet my eyes immediately. Last week, when I was at the hardware store, I ran into Jim Morrison. You remember Jim from my old department? Of course. Jim had been to our house dozens of times over the years. He asked me how you were handling everything. Said he'd heard through his wife that you were going through a rough patch professionally. Robert's jaw tightened. I told him he must have bad information, that your business was thriving. He seemed surprised. The room felt like it was tilting slightly. Jim's wife doesn't even know what I do for a living. That's what I thought too. But Margaret, if Jim knew, if his wife knew, then Derek isn't just talking to your clients. He's spreading this story through other channels too. I stared at my husband, the full scope of Derek's betrayal beginning to crystallize. He's poisoning my professional reputation throughout the entire business community. It looks that way. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between us. Everything I'd built, every relationship I'd cultivated, every referral network I'd developed over 15 years of careful work was potentially compromised. There's more, Robert said quietly. More what? More I should have told you. He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of buying time when he had to deliver difficult news. Emily called yesterday while you were at that client meeting. My daughter rarely called during business hours unless something was important. What did she say? She wanted to know if we needed financial help. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Someone at her firm told her they'd heard you were struggling professionally, that we might be having money troubles. Robert's voice was steady, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. She was prepared to offer us a loan, Margaret. Our daughter was ready to help her parents through what she'd been told was a financial crisis. I felt the blood drain from my face. Emily, who was still paying off law school loans, who was working 70-hour weeks to establish herself at a competitive firm, had been prepared to sacrifice her own financial stability because someone had convinced her that her parents were in trouble. Derek has been talking to people in Emily's professional circle too, I whispered. That's what it looks like. The scope of his betrayal was even more extensive than I'd imagined. Derek hadn't just been undermining my business relationships. He'd been systematically destroying my reputation across multiple professional networks, spreading lies that were affecting my family's personal relationships and causing my own daughter to worry about our welfare. I'm going to destroy him, I said quietly. Robert looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen in our marriage. Not disapproval, not concern, but something that looked almost like pride mixed with determination. No, he said firmly. We're going to destroy him. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. The name on the screen made my heart stop. It was from Derek. I stared at Derek's name on my phone screen, my hands trembling slightly. Robert noticed my reaction immediately. What is it? Derek just texted me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, discussing the extent of his betrayal, and he had the audacity to contact me directly. I opened the message with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Hey, Margaret, hope you're doing better. Can we talk tomorrow? I have some ideas that might help with your situation. I read the message aloud to Robert, my voice dripping with disbelief. Help with my situation. The situation he created. Robert shook his head. The man has nerve. I'll give him that. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it might explode. My mind was racing through the implications of everything we'd discovered. Derek hadn't just been gossiping casually about me. This was calculated, systematic destruction of my professional reputation. The fact that the rumors had reached Emily's professional circle proved how far-reaching his campaign had become. I keep thinking about all the times I covered for him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. When he was late for client meetings, when he mixed up project details, when he forgot important deadlines. I made excuses for him because I thought we were a team. You were being a good colleague, Robert said gently. No, I was being naive. The anger was building in my chest, hot and righteous. While I was protecting his reputation, he was destroying mine. While I was making sure our clients saw us as competent professionals, he was telling them I was unreliable and having personal problems. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard. The garden I'd spent years cultivating looked peaceful in the fading light, every plant carefully chosen and nurtured. It struck me that my career had been built the same way, methodically, patiently, with attention to detail and long-term planning. Derek had been hacking through it like a weed whacker. The worst part, I continued, turning back to Robert, is that I started doubting myself. When clients seemed distant or when projects didn't go as smoothly as usual, I wondered if I was losing my touch. I questioned my own abilities because I couldn't understand why things were changing. Robert's expression darkened. He had you gaslighting yourself. The phrase hit home with startling accuracy. That's exactly what had been happening. Derek's lies had been so pervasive that they'd begun to affect my own self-perception. I'd been working harder, staying later, second-guessing decisions I would normally make with confidence, all because I couldn't figure out why my professional relationships seemed to be shifting. I need to think about how to handle this, I said, sitting back down. This isn't just about confronting Derek. My reputation has been damaged across multiple networks. Some of these relationships might be irreparable. Maybe not as irreparable as you think, Robert said thoughtfully. People who know your work, who've worked with you for years, they'll listen if you present them with facts. I picked up my phone again, staring at Derek's message. The casual tone of it, the presumption that he could offer to help with problems he'd created, made my skin crawl. But it also gave me an idea. He wants to talk tomorrow, I said slowly. You're not seriously considering meeting with him? Actually, I am. I looked at Robert, seeing the concern in his eyes. But not the way he's expecting. I need to understand exactly what he's been telling people and why. I need to know the full scope of what I'm dealing with before I can figure out how to fix it. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. You're planning something. I'm planning to get the truth, all of it. My phone buzzed again with another text, and for a moment I thought it might be Derek following up on his first message. Instead, it was from Sarah. Called 3 more potential clients today. Same story everywhere. Someone needs to pay for this. I stared at Sarah's message, feeling a fresh wave of anger surge through my chest. 3 more clients. The scope of Derek's sabotage was becoming clearer with each conversation, each phone call, each revelation. What had started as suspicious behavior was now revealed as a systematic campaign to undermine everything I'd built over the past decade. Sarah's found more, I said, holding up my phone for Robert to see. 3 more potential clients who were told I'm unreliable. Robert's jaw tightened as he read the message. This is beyond workplace politics. This is deliberate career assassination. I walked back to the window, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the maple tree we'd planted when we first moved into this house. The tree had grown slowly but steadily, its roots spreading deep, its branches reaching wider each year, just like my professional network had grown. And now, Derek was poisoning those roots, one conversation at a time. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway broke through my thoughts. Margaret's voice carried through the evening air as she talked on her phone, probably wrapping up another work call. Even at 7 in the evening, she was still putting out fires for her own clients. The irony wasn't lost on me that while she was building relationships through dedication and reliability, Derek was telling people I possessed neither quality. I keep thinking about all the projects that didn't materialize, I said, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The clients who seemed interested and then went quiet, the referrals that never came through. How long has this been going on? That's what you need to find out tomorrow, Robert said. But you can't go into that meeting blind. You need a strategy. The front door opened, and Margaret's footsteps echoed through the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her blazer slung over one arm, her expression weary but alert. The moment she saw my face, her entire demeanor shifted. What happened? She asked, setting her bag down with deliberate care. You look like someone died. Worse, Robert said grimly. Someone's been systematically destroying her reputation for months. Margaret's eyes sharpened, and I watched her slip into what Robert and I privately called her lawyer mode. Her shoulders straightened, her gaze became more focused, and she crossed her arms in a way that suggested she was ready to take on whatever problem we were about to present. I filled her in on everything Sarah had discovered, watching Margaret's expression grow darker with each detail. When I mentioned Derek's casual text message offering to help with my personal problems, Margaret actually laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The audacity, she said, shaking her head. He creates the problem and then positions himself as the solution? It's textbook manipulation. He wants to meet tomorrow, I said. I'm thinking about saying yes. Margaret raised an eyebrow. To what end? So he can lie to your face the same way he's been lying to your clients? So I can get him to admit what he's done. So I can understand the full scope of the damage. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling exhausted. I need to know exactly what story he's been telling and to whom. Sarah's doing great work, but she can only reach so many people. Robert sat down across from me, his expression thoughtful. You're talking about confronting him directly. That's risky. Everything's risky at this point, I replied. My reputation is already damaged. At least this way, I might get some answers. Margaret remained standing, pacing slowly around the kitchen island. I could practically see her mind working through the angles, considering possibilities and potential pitfalls. This was how she approached every case, every negotiation, every problem that required strategic thinking. If you do meet with him, she said finally, you need to be prepared for him to deny everything. People who engage in this kind of behavior are rarely honest when confronted. Then what do you suggest? Document everything, before the meeting, after the meeting, during if possible. Create a paper trail. And don't go in expecting a confession. Go in expecting more lies and be ready to catch him in them. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Derek, and my stomach clenched as I read his follow-up message. I know you're probably busy with everything you're dealing with, but I really think we should talk soon. Tomorrow afternoon works best for me. The presumption in his tone, the subtle reinforcement of his fictional narrative about my problems, made my hands shake slightly as I held the phone. Robert noticed and reached across the table to steady my wrist. He's still doing it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Even in his messages to me, he's reinforcing the story that I'm struggling with personal issues. Like he's so committed to this lie that he can't turn it off. Margaret stopped pacing and looked at the message over my shoulder. Or he's testing to see if you know what he's been doing. This could be his way of gauging whether his lies are starting to catch up with him. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of our neighbor's dog barking. I stared at Derek's message, feeling the weight of the decision I needed to make. Part of me wanted to ignore him completely, to focus on rebuilding my reputation without giving him the satisfaction of a response. But another part of me knew that ignoring the problem wouldn't make it disappear. I need to know how deep this goes, I said finally. Sarah's found 6 clients so far who were told I'm unreliable. But Derek's been in this industry for years. He has connections I don't even know about. The damage could be much worse than we realize. Robert squeezed my hand gently. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. But don't let anger drive your decision-making. This Derek character has already proven he's willing to play dirty. Margaret pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm canceling my morning meetings tomorrow. If you're going to confront him, I want to help you prepare. We need to think through every possible scenario. You don't have to do that, I protested. Your work is important too. Not more important than this, she said firmly. Family first. Always. As I looked around the kitchen at the 2 people who knew me best, who understood the magnitude of what Derek had done to my career, I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. But tonight, I had allies, and that made all the difference. My phone buzzed once more, and I glanced down, expecting another message from Derek. Instead, it was Sarah again. Just got off the phone with someone who might have information about Derek's other targets. Can we talk tonight? I stared at Sarah's latest message, my stomach knotting with a mixture of hope and dread. Other targets. The phrase echoed in my mind as I realized Derek's pattern of sabotage might extend far beyond just me. What does it say? Margaret asked, noticing my expression had shifted again. I read Sarah's message aloud, and the kitchen fell into another heavy silence. Robert leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. This is bigger than we thought, he said quietly. If Derek's done this to other people, there might be a pattern we can use to expose him. Margaret moved closer, her protective instincts clearly activated. But it also means he's more dangerous than we realized. Someone who systematically destroys careers isn't going to back down easily when confronted. I looked between my brother and sister, seeing my own fears reflected in their faces. Growing up, Margaret had always been the fierce one, ready to fight anyone who threatened our family. Robert was the strategist, thinking 3 steps ahead. Tonight, I needed both of those qualities. I should call Sarah back, I said, my finger hovering over her contact. If there are other people Derek has hurt, maybe we can figure out how to stop him together. Do it, Margaret said firmly. But put it on speaker. We're all in this now. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice tense with excitement and anger. I've been digging deeper into Derek's background, and I found someone who used to work with him at his previous company. What did they tell you? I asked, my heart racing. Derek pulled the same thing there. Spread rumors about a colleague's reliability, made subtle comments about their personal life affecting their work performance. The person ended up leaving the industry entirely. Robert leaned forward toward the phone. Sarah, this is Robert, Margaret's brother. Did this person document any of Derek's behavior? Not really, Sarah replied, her disappointment clear. It happened over 2 years ago, and back then, they didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Sound familiar? The parallel hit me like a physical blow. Derek had refined his technique, turned character assassination into an art form. Margaret reached over and squeezed my shoulder, her touch grounding me. There's more, Sarah continued. I think Derek might be positioning himself for a promotion. The timing of his campaign against you coincides with some restructuring rumors at our company. If you're seen as unreliable, and he's the one pointing it out to management, he gets credit for identifying a problem employee while making himself look more competent by comparison. I finished, the pieces clicking into place. Margaret's jaw tightened. What a calculated bastard. The question is, what do we do with this information? Robert asked. Speculation about his motives won't be enough to prove what he's done. Sarah's voice took on a determined edge. That's why I think you should meet with him tomorrow. Not to confront him directly, but to get him talking. If we can record him admitting to even part of what he's done? Absolutely not, Margaret interjected sharply. That's too risky. What if he realizes what she's doing? He could make things even worse. But what if it's our only chance to get real evidence? I found myself saying, surprising everyone, including myself. Sarah's right about one thing. Speculation won't rebuild my reputation. Robert stood up and began pacing the small kitchen, his mind clearly working through possibilities. If you do meet with him, it can't be alone, and it can't be anywhere he might expect a setup. It needs to feel completely natural. The office cafeteria, I said suddenly. He suggested meeting tomorrow afternoon. It's public enough that he'll feel comfortable, but private enough for real conversation. Margaret shook her head vigorously. I don't like this. Too many things could go wrong. Then help me make sure they don't, I said, looking at my sister with newfound resolve. You've always been the one who taught me to fight back when someone tries to knock me down. Well, I'm ready to fight back. Sarah's voice crackled through the phone speaker. I'll be in the office tomorrow afternoon, too. Not close enough to interfere, but near enough to help if something goes sideways. Robert stopped pacing and looked at me seriously. If you're really going to do this, we need to prepare you tonight. Every possible thing he might say, every way the conversation could turn. You need to be ready for anything. Margaret sighed deeply, her resistance beginning to crack. Fine, but we do this right. No improvising, no letting emotions take over. This Derek character has already proven he's manipulative. We can't give him any ammunition to use against you. As my family and Sarah began strategizing around me, I felt something shift inside my chest. For weeks, I'd been reacting to Derek's attacks, always a step behind, always defending myself against lies I hadn't even known were being spread. Tomorrow, for the first time, I would take the offensive. My phone buzzed with another message from Derek. Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow? I really think I can help you work through whatever's been affecting your performance lately. The audacity of his continued manipulation no longer made me feel powerless. Instead, it fueled a growing determination. Derek had underestimated one crucial factor in his careful campaign of sabotage. He didn't know about the people willing to stand with me. All right, I said, looking around at the 3 people who had dropped everything to help me fight back. Let's figure out how to catch him. But as we began planning in earnest, none of us noticed the new email that had just arrived in my work inbox, one that would change everything about tomorrow's meeting. The planning session stretched well past midnight. Robert had filled 3 pages with notes, mapping out conversation strategies and potential responses to Derek's manipulations. Margaret, despite her initial reluctance, proved surprisingly adept at predicting underhanded tactics. He'll try to make you feel grateful that he's helping you, she said, refilling her coffee mug for the 4th time. Classic manipulation makes you feel indebted while he's actually making things worse. Sarah's voice had grown hoarse from talking through the phone speaker for hours. Remember, the goal isn't to trap him into a confession. It's to understand his strategy so you can counter it effectively. By the time we finally called it a night, I felt more prepared than I had in weeks. But sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams where conversations spiraled out of control, and Derek's satisfied smirk filled my vision. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous energy. I checked my work email while getting ready, scanning through the usual mix of client updates and internal memos. Then I saw it, a message from Derek, sent at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. Had some thoughts about our conversation today? Maybe we should make it more formal? I've CC'd Linda from HR. She's available to join us at 2 p.m. in Conference Room B instead of the cafeteria. Looking forward to a productive discussion. My hands went cold. Linda from HR meant this was no longer a casual conversation between colleagues. This was Derek turning whatever narrative he'd crafted into an official company matter. I called Margaret immediately, my voice shaking as I read the email aloud. That calculating little weasel, she said, anger sharp in her voice. He waited until after business hours to send that, knowing you wouldn't see it until this morning when it's too late to prepare properly. I should call in sick, I said, sinking onto my couch. I'm not ready for an HR meeting. That changes everything. No, Margaret said firmly. Running away now makes you look guilty of whatever he's been saying, but you're not going in unprepared. Within 20 minutes, Margaret was at my apartment, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder and determination written across her face. We're documenting everything. Every project you've completed on time, every client interaction, every email that shows your actual performance. She was right. While she pulled up files and organized a portfolio of my work, I called Sarah to update her on the change in plans. An HR meeting is actually better in some ways, Sarah said, though I could hear the concern in her voice. It's official, which means there's a record. Whatever accusations he's been making, he'll have to state them clearly instead of hiding behind vague insinuations. But what if Linda already believes his version of events? I asked. Then you show her the truth, Margaret said, looking up from her laptop. 3 clients have specifically requested to work with you again in the past month. That's not the track record of someone who's unreliable. Robert arrived with lunch and moral support, taking one look at the papers spread across my coffee table and nodding approvingly. Good. You're fighting with facts, not emotions. I keep thinking there's something I'm missing, I said, picking at the sandwich he'd brought. Derek's been too confident about this whole thing, like he knows something I don't. Margaret paused in her typing. What do you mean? The way he offered to help yesterday, like he was doing me this enormous favor. And now suddenly it's an HR meeting? It feels calculated? Sarah's voice came through the phone speaker, thoughtful. Maybe that's exactly what it is. What if he's been building up to this HR meeting all along? The rumors, the undermining. What if it was all designed to create a paper trail? The thought sent a chill through me. You think this is about more than just sabotaging my reputation? I think Derek might be positioning himself for something bigger, Sarah said. A promotion, a transfer to your accounts, something that requires you to be out of the picture. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. If that's true, then this meeting is his endgame. He's going to present HR with a narrative he's been carefully constructing. But we have our own narrative now, Margaret said, gesturing to the organized files on her laptop screen. And ours has the advantage of being true. As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave for the office, I felt the same shift in perspective that had started the night before. Derek had orchestrated this meeting, chosen the time and place, and crafted his version of events. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He thought I'd walk into that conference room alone and unprepared, just as I'd been caught off guard by everything else he'd done. Instead, I had 3 people who'd spent hours helping me prepare for exactly this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. See you at 2. I really think this will help clear the air. I showed the message to Margaret, who shook her head in disgust. He's still pretending to be your ally, even as he's setting you up. Not for much longer, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. But as I walked toward the office building, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek had one more surprise waiting for me in that conference room. The HR office felt smaller than I remembered, with its generic motivational posters and that persistent smell of industrial carpet cleaner. I arrived 5 minutes early, my folder of documentation tucked under my arm, and found Derek already seated at the oval conference table, chatting casually with Linda from Human Resources. There she is, Derek said, standing with that same concerned smile I'd grown to despise. Thanks for making time for this. I know it's probably not easy. Linda gestured for me to sit across from Derek. She was younger than I'd expected for an HR director, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of carefully neutral expression that probably came with the job. I want to start by saying, this is an informal discussion, Linda began, opening a yellow legal pad. Derek came to me with some concerns about workplace dynamics, and I thought it would be best if we could all sit down together and address them directly. I nodded, keeping my expression calm, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I appreciate that approach. Derek leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. I've been worried about you for a while now. The missed deadlines, the client complaints, the way you've seemed so scattered lately. I know you've been dealing with some personal issues. What personal issues? I asked, my voice steady. He blinked as if surprised by the directness of my question. Well, I mean, it's obvious you've been struggling. Missing meetings, that Henderson project that got so messy, clients calling to ask if you're okay? Which clients? I opened my folder and pulled out the first set of documents Margaret had helped me organize. Because I have the client satisfaction surveys from the past 3 months here, and they tell a different story. Linda's eyebrows rose slightly as I slid the papers across to her. Derek's confident expression flickered just for a moment. I also have my attendance records, I continued, pulling out another sheet. I haven't missed a single scheduled meeting in 4 months, and here's the timeline for the Henderson project, showing it was completed 2 days ahead of the original deadline. Derek's laugh sounded forced. See, this is what I'm talking about. Getting defensive over every little thing, turning simple conversations into confrontations. Is that what happened when you told the Morrison account that I was going through some things and they should work with you instead? I asked. The silence stretched for several seconds. Linda's pen had stopped moving across her notepad. I never said that, Derek said finally. You did. On Tuesday afternoon, around 3:30, Morrison called me directly to ask if I needed time off. I pulled out another document. Here's the email thread where they expressed concern about my well-being, based on what they called your colleague's heads up about your situation. Derek's face had gone pale, but he pressed on. Look, if I said something, it was only because I was worried. You haven't seemed like yourself lately. What specifically made you think that? Linda asked, and I caught something in her tone that suggested this wasn't going the way Derek had expected. She's been, I don't know, distracted, emotional, making careless mistakes. Can you give me an example of these mistakes? I asked, my folder still full of evidence. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. It's not about specific incidents. It's more of an overall pattern. Because I have my error reports here, I said, sliding another sheet across the table. 0 client complaints in the past 6 months, 3 commendations for exceeding expectations, and a request from the Clearwater Group specifically asking to continue working with me on their next project. Linda was studying the documents now, her neutral expression shifting towards something more focused. Derek, when you came to me yesterday, you mentioned several specific incidents of unreliability. Do you have documentation for any of those? I didn't think to bring files, Derek said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely flustered. This was supposed to be an informal conversation about getting her some help. Help with what, exactly? Linda asked. Derek looked between us, and I could see him recalibrating, searching for a new angle. She's been acting paranoid, suspicious of her coworkers. Yesterday she accused me of sabotaging her, which is just... It's concerning. I didn't accuse you of anything, I said calmly. I asked you directly if you'd been telling clients I was unreliable, and you deflected the question. Because it's a crazy question to ask a colleague. Is it crazy if it's true? Linda asked, and Derek's mouth snapped shut. I felt a surge of something that might have been vindication, but I kept my voice level. I have 3 separate instances where clients mentioned concerns about my reliability or personal problems, all traced back to conversations with Derek. I have documentation showing my actual performance metrics don't support those concerns, and I have a pattern of Derek positioning himself as the alternative contact person for my accounts. Linda was writing now, her pen moving quickly across the notepad. Derek stared at the table, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Derek, Linda said finally, I'm going to need you to provide documentation for the performance issues you reported to me yesterday. Can you have that to me by tomorrow morning? Yes, of course. And I'll be reaching out to the clients mentioned in these emails to clarify the nature of their concerns. She tapped the papers I'd provided. In the meantime, I want to be very clear that interdepartmental communications about colleague performance should come through HR channels, not through client conversations. Derek nodded, but he was looking at me now with something I'd never seen from him before. Not condescension or false concern, but something closer to wariness. "I think that covers everything for now," Linda said, closing her notepad. "I'll follow up with both of you once I've reviewed the additional documentation." As we gathered our things, Derek lingered by his chair. "You know this doesn't change anything," he said quietly, so Linda couldn't hear. "People are still going to have questions." I looked at him for a long moment, this person who'd spent months trying to undermine my reputation, and felt something settle into place. "Let them ask," I said. "I have answers." But as I walked back to my desk, Derek's parting words echoed in my mind. He'd sounded less like someone who'd been caught, and more like someone who still had cards left to play. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "How did it go?" Before I could answer, I noticed several coworkers glancing in my direction, their expressions unreadable. Derek had been right about one thing: people were going to have questions. And I had a sinking feeling that our HR meeting was just the beginning of a much larger conversation that was about to unfold whether I wanted it or not. I typed back to Margaret quickly. "Mixed results. Derek's in damage control mode, but he's not backing down." The afternoon dragged by with an uncomfortable undercurrent I couldn't shake. Every conversation that stopped when I walked by, every glance that lasted a second too long, Derek had been right about people having questions, and I was starting to feel the weight of unspoken speculation settling around me like fog. At 5:30, I was gathering my things when Derek appeared at my cubicle. He looked different somehow, less polished than usual. His tie was slightly askew, and there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested his afternoon hadn't gone much better than mine. "Can we talk?" he asked, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. "I think we've said enough for one day. Look, I know how this looks, but you're making it bigger than it needs to be." He leaned against my desk, trying for casual but missing the mark. The clients I spoke to were already having concerns. I was just being honest about what I observed. Something cold settled in my stomach. "What you observed?" "The late arrivals, the distracted phone calls, the days you seemed like you weren't really here." He shrugged, but his eyes were watching me carefully. "I wasn't spreading rumors. I was responding to legitimate questions about team reliability. Derek, I haven't been late once this month. I checked my badge logs." "Being physically present isn't the same as being mentally present," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone that made my skin crawl. "Everyone's noticed you've been off lately. I just didn't think it was fair to leave clients wondering." The worst part was how reasonable he sounded, how he'd managed to twist concern into justification. I could see exactly how he'd presented it to Linda yesterday. Not as sabotage, but as team management. "What did you tell Linda about my performance?" I asked. Derek straightened, smoothing his tie. "The truth, that there have been quality concerns and some reliability issues that needed to be addressed." He paused. "She agreed it was worth documenting." My phone rang, startling us both. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. "I have to take this," I said, but Derek didn't move. "Think about what I said," he told me as I answered. "Sometimes the best thing for everyone is to just acknowledge when you need to step back and regroup." I watched him walk away as Margaret's voice came through the phone. "How are you holding up?" "I think I might have made things worse," I said quietly. Derek's not denying anything, but he's reframing everything, making it sound like he was just being responsible. "What do you mean?" I explained Derek's visit, his claims about my performance, the way he'd managed to make his interference sound like legitimate concern. Margaret was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "He's smart," she said finally. "But he made one mistake." "What's that?" "He's assuming Linda is going to take his word over documented evidence. But you said she's calling the clients directly, right?" "Yeah, but what if they back up his story? What if they really do have concerns?" "Then you deal with that when it happens," Margaret said firmly. "But right now, you're letting him get in your head. Don't give him that power." After we hung up, I sat in the empty office for a few more minutes, trying to sort through the tangle of doubt Derek had just planted. The rational part of my mind knew Margaret was right. I had documentation. I had evidence. I had a pattern of suspicious behavior to point to. But there was another part of me, smaller and more insistent, that kept whispering, "What if he's right? What if people really had been talking? What if I'd missed something obvious about my own performance?" My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Dinner's ready when you get home. Rough day?" I started to type back something reassuring, something that would keep the worry out of his voice when I walked through the door. But instead, I found myself staring at the screen, wondering how much of this mess I was ready to bring home with me. Because Derek had planted one more seed of doubt that I couldn't quite shake. If my own coworker could see problems I didn't know I had, what else might I be missing? I stared at my phone for another moment before typing back to Tom. "Very rough. Need to talk when I get home." The drive gave me time to think, but thinking only made Derek's words echo louder. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. Tom was waiting in the kitchen, concern written across his face the moment he saw me. "Okay, what happened?" he asked, pulling out my chair at the table. "And don't say nothing, because I can see it from here." I sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. "Derek came to see me after everyone left. He's not denying what he did, Tom. He's making it sound like he was doing his job." "How, exactly?" "He says there really have been performance issues. That clients have complained about my work, about me being unreliable. That Linda asked him to document everything because she was concerned too." The words tasted bitter. What if he's right? What if I really have been screwing up and I just didn't see it? Tom sat across from me, his expression shifting from concern to something sharper. "Hold on. Yesterday, you were confident you had evidence against him. Margaret helped you put together a whole case. Now suddenly, you think you're the problem? But what if I missed something obvious? What if people really were talking about issues with my work, and I was just oblivious?" "Listen to yourself," Tom said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is exactly what manipulative people do. They take your moment of strength and twist it until you're questioning everything you know to be true." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "Derek said Linda's going to want to talk to me about stepping back from some responsibilities. That maybe I should consider it might be best for everyone." "And you're actually considering this?" "I don't know what I'm considering anymore." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hands. "Okay, let's go back to facts. Before Derek said anything today, what did you know for certain?" "That he'd been telling clients I was having personal problems." "Right. And did he deny that?" "No. But he said it was just him being concerned about the team's reputation when clients asked about delays or issues." "Issues that he claims you caused?" "Yes." Tom nodded slowly. "And these performance problems he's talking about, did you know about them before today?" "Had anyone else mentioned them to you?" I started to answer, then stopped. "No. Linda's never said anything to me directly about my work being subpar, and the clients I work with have always seemed satisfied. So Derek is the only person who's telling you there are problems. When you put it like that, I'm putting it exactly like it is, Tom said. This guy spent months undermining you behind your back. Now that you've called him out, he's trying to make you doubt your own reality. Don't let him. My phone rang, and I saw Margaret's name again. Tom nodded toward it. Take it. But remember what you knew to be true before he got in your head. I answered, putting it on speaker so Tom could hear. I've been thinking about what you told me, Margaret said without preamble. About Derek's visit and what he said about your performance. Margaret, what if he's right, though? What if there really were issues and I just didn't see them? There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice came back, sharper than before. That's not the person I talked to yesterday. Yesterday you had clarity and evidence. Today you sound like someone who's been expertly gaslighted. Tom squeezed my hand and mouthed, Exactly. But the things he said made sense, I protested. About being responsible for the team, about Linda being concerned. Did Linda tell you she was concerned? Well, no, but Derek claimed. Derek told you. Margaret's voice was getting more intense. Do you hear yourself? You're taking the word of the person who's been sabotaging you about your own performance. I felt something shift in my chest, like a knot loosening. You're right. God, you're both right. He really got to me. That was the point, Tom said. He knew exactly what buttons to push. Margaret's voice softened slightly. Look, I get it. When someone attacks your competence, it hits different than other kinds of criticism. But that's precisely why it's such an effective manipulation tactic. So, what do I do now? Linda's still planning to call those clients tomorrow. You let her, Margaret said firmly. Because if Derek's claims about your performance are true, you'll deal with that reality. But if they're not, and I suspect they're not, then you'll have even stronger evidence that he's been manipulating the situation. After we hung up, Tom and I sat in the quiet kitchen for a few minutes. I felt like I'd been on an emotional roller coaster all day. I almost let him win, I said finally. Almost, but you didn't. What if Linda's calls don't go the way we hope? What if some clients really do have concerns? Tom considered this. Then you address those concerns honestly and professionally. But you don't let Derek define the narrative anymore. I nodded, feeling more like myself than I had since Derek walked into my office. But as we finally sat down to the dinner that had long since gone cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek wasn't done yet. People like him didn't just give up when their first attempt at damage control failed. And tomorrow, when Linda started making those calls, I had the unsettling certainty that I'd find out exactly what Derek's next move would be. The next morning, I woke up with that peculiar combination of dread and anticipation that comes before a potentially life-changing day. Tom had already left for work, but he'd left a note on my coffee mug. Remember who you really are today. I got to the office early, hoping to catch Linda before the day got chaotic. She was already at her desk, looking through what appeared to be a client contact list. Morning, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. About those calls today. Linda looked up, her expression unreadable. I've been thinking about this all night. I have to ask, is there anything you want to tell me before I start calling people? The question hit me unexpectedly. Was she giving me a chance to confess to problems that didn't exist? Or was she genuinely trying to be fair? Linda, I honestly don't know what Derek told you, but I believe my client relationships are solid. I think you'll find that out when you make those calls. She studied my face for a long moment. All right then. I'll start around 10, after people have had their morning coffee. The next few hours crawled by. I tried to focus on my regular work, but my mind kept wandering to what was happening in Linda's office. Every time I heard her phone ring, my stomach clenched. Around 11:30, Margaret appeared at my desk. She didn't say anything, just raised her eyebrows in a questioning look. Linda's making the calls now, I whispered. I can hear her talking, but I can't make out what anyone's saying. How are you holding up? Honestly, I feel like I'm waiting for a medical test result. Margaret perched on the edge of my desk. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. But I have a good feeling about this. Just then, Linda's office door opened. She walked toward us with the expression I couldn't quite read. Serious, but not angry. Can I see you both for a minute? She asked. My legs felt unsteady as we walked to her office. Linda closed the door behind us and gestured for us to sit. I've called 6 clients so far, she began, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Every single one of them was surprised that I was calling to check on your performance. Not one of them had any complaints. In fact, 3 of them specifically mentioned how reliable and communicative you've been. The relief was so intense, I felt dizzy. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. But here's the interesting part, Linda continued. When I mentioned that there had been some concern about responsiveness to emails and calls, 2 clients told me they'd heard from Derek recently. He'd contacted them directly, supposedly on behalf of the team, asking if there were any issues with service they wanted to address. Margaret and I exchanged glances. What did they tell him? I asked. Both said they told Derek everything was fine, but now I'm wondering why Derek was contacting clients directly without running it by me first. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made me feel sick. He was fishing for complaints, I said slowly. And when he couldn't find any, he decided to create the impression of problems anyway. Linda nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. I'm going to call Derek in here after lunch. I want to hear his explanation for why he's been having private conversations with our clients. After we left Linda's office, Margaret and I walked to the break room in stunned silence. I can't believe how elaborate his manipulation was, I said finally. He didn't just spread rumors. He actively tried to create the problems he was claiming already existed. The scary part is how systematic it was, Margaret replied. If Linda hadn't decided to fact-check his claims, you might never have known the full extent of what he was doing. I poured myself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. I keep thinking about yesterday, how he almost convinced me that I really was the problem. How he made me doubt my own memory and perception. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you question reality itself. The afternoon brought a different kind of tension. Around 2 o'clock, I could hear Derek's voice in Linda's office, though I couldn't make out the words. The conversation went on for nearly an hour. When Derek finally emerged, he looked shaken. He didn't make eye contact with me as he returned to his desk, and for the rest of the day, he was uncharacteristically quiet. Linda called me into her office again just before 5. Derek admitted to contacting clients directly, she said without preamble. He claimed he was being proactive about quality control, but he couldn't explain why he didn't follow proper channels or why he gave me the impression that clients had already complained. What happens now? Linda sighed. Derek will be receiving a formal written warning about his conduct. He's also being removed from client-facing responsibilities for the next month while I evaluate whether he can be trusted in that role going forward. The vindication felt good, but it was mixed with sadness. Derek and I had worked together for 2 years. I'd never considered us close friends, but I'd respected him professionally. Learning the extent of his deception felt like a betrayal that went beyond workplace politics. That evening, I called Margaret to fill her in on the day's developments. "I'm proud of you for seeing this through," she said. "It would have been easier to just accept Derek's version of events and try to work around it." "I almost did accept it. Yesterday, I was ready to believe that I was the problem. But you didn't. And now, you know the truth." As Tom and I made dinner together that night, I found myself reflecting on how close I'd come to letting Derek's manipulation destroy my confidence, and possibly my career. "The thing that bothers me most," I told Tom as we chopped vegetables, "is how effective his tactics were. If Linda hadn't decided to verify his claims, I might have spent months or even years believing I was failing at my job. People like Derek count on others not fact-checking their claims," Tom replied. "They rely on creating enough doubt and confusion that it feels easier to just accept their version of reality." I nodded, thinking about how Derek had used my own conscientiousness against me. How he'd made my willingness to consider criticism feel like evidence of guilt. "I learned something important, though," I said. "When someone's claims about your behavior don't match your own experience, it's worth investigating before you accept their narrative." The next few days at work were awkward but peaceful. Derek kept to himself, focusing on the internal projects Linda had reassigned him to. He didn't apologize, but he also didn't try to continue his previous behavior. I found myself more aware of workplace dynamics, more attentive to how information flowed between colleagues. Margaret and I talked about it over lunch one day. "It's made me realize how much we take on faith in professional relationships," I said. "We assume people are being honest about their motivations and their interactions with others." "Most people are honest most of the time," Margaret replied. "But it's worth remembering that not everyone operates from the same ethical framework." "I just wish I'd recognized what was happening sooner." "Don't do that to yourself." Derek's behavior was calculated and sophisticated. He knew exactly how to present his concerns in a way that seemed legitimate. As the weeks passed, the immediate crisis faded, but the experience left me changed. I was more careful about accepting second-hand information without verification. I was also more protective of my own professional reputation, making sure to document important communications and decisions. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own perceptions while remaining open to legitimate feedback. It was a delicate balance, but an important one. The whole experience taught me that workplace politics aren't always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes the most dangerous colleagues are the ones who undermine you quietly and systematically, using your own professionalism and self-doubt as weapons against you. But it also showed me the value of having allies like Margaret and supervisors like Linda who are willing to investigate claims rather than simply accepting them. And it reminded me that my own integrity and track record were my best defenses against unfair attacks. Derek eventually transferred to a different department, and I never did learn what had motivated his campaign against me. Maybe it was professional jealousy. Maybe it was a misguided attempt to advance his own career. Or maybe it was just his way of dealing with workplace stress. In the end, the specific motivation mattered less than the lesson. Trust your instincts, verify claims, and never let someone else's narrative about your life become more real to you than your own experience.